In the last episode of Idea Channel, we talked about listicles. Let's see what you had to say. Gil Hong writes a comment about the economic factors that influence the creation of lists and listicles, and this is something that we didn't get into at all, and I think is a really important and interesting part of the conversation, because especially if you're making a list where each item is a page, you can force people to look at more ads because they're loading more pages. And I wonder if I've noticed recently that there has been a change in these kinds of articles where there used to never be an option to view all items on one page. That now seems to be pervasive, and I'm really curious about what led that to be the case. When did that change and why? Because I would imagine that after a certain amount of time, like people would become frustrated having to just load ads, especially if you're on your phone and using your data, because that's a lot of extra data. But yeah, this is a super important part of this conversation, and it was a great comment. Alle Spalle talks about how lists can tap into that part of our brains that likes hierarchical thinking, but that, of course, the world is not made entirely out of hierarchies, and that you might ask someone to think that way, and it will cause them pause, that they will have a bit of a hard time with it. And this makes me think about this thing that I heard about a couple days ago, which was this study where people would put on like an Oculus Rift VR thing, and they would chop down trees in the VR experience. And then in the second part of the study, a researcher would spill a glass of water, and those people would use fewer paper towels to clean up the spill after having chopped down trees in the VR. And this makes me wonder, I wonder if you were to have people read a bunch of listicles and then do some action like list their favorite things, would they be better or worse at it? I wonder if this study has been done. I don't know, I'm gonna go do some Googling. So Caleb B. Goodwin gets to, I think, another aspect of why the listicle has been sort of saddled with so much hate, and that is, I think a lot of publishers and editors know that knowing what the next item in the list is reward enough for our brains, and so they can skimp on actual content. And so there's this kind of weird tension that happens when you read a listicle a lot of times, which is that you get the pleasure of knowing what the next item is or what the full set of things is, but you don't get the actual pleasure of learning anything about those things. So it allows the people who are creating these things to, again, place ads on pages, get people to look at them, but doesn't have the full sort of satisfaction of gaining information. Relatedly, NerdSync talks about the completion principle, which is this idea that as human beings, we need things to be whole and finite and complete. And so what the listicle does is it gives you one little insight into what is going to be talked about, and then your brain goes, well, now I need to know the rest of it. And I think, that's, you've probably heard that referred to as the curiosity gap. That was Upworthy's contribution to the space. I think it was them, that they pique your curiosity, leave a gap, and the goal is to get you to jump the gap and to look at their listicle. NaryaJRRT says something really interesting that never occurred to me. They compare the listicle to more of a kind of spoken format, that the listicle more approaches a speech than it does an article, and this really sort of gives me some pause. And this is a thing that I'm gonna keep thinking about. But I wonder where the listicle fits in the kind of constellation of things that we consider internet native formats and the Venn diagram of like speech acts, because I think of chatting and vlogs very much as being like speech, but it never dawned on me that the list is in some way supposed to ape or mimic or channel the way that people talk. I don't know. What do you guys think about this? Is there a connection to be made here? Tim O'Callahan, yeah, that's me at a cocktail party. Umberto Eco, everybody, yeah, I'm cool. Who am I kidding? I'm actually, at this point, I'm mostly talking about MasterChef Junior, so. Crispy Bacon has it out for BuzzFeed and uses them as an example of how listicles can barely even ever qualify as content. They are completely devoid of any kind of useful information, and uses, one of the examples that they use is a listicle that is just smiley faces. And, you know, I'm all for sort of being judgy or critical of the economic forces that cause BuzzFeed to do things like instrumentalize demographics. You know, 23 reasons you know that you are this person from this specific place because we want you belonging to this demographic to look at our website so that we can gather information about you. And yeah, we should ask all kinds of questions about that and be critical of it. But I also wonder at what point that method leads BuzzFeed to kind of test the genre of listicle, because sometimes I'll look at a listicle on BuzzFeed and think, this is like a Scott Walker song. Like this is a listicle, this is a list or a listicle in the way that Scott Walker songs are songs. They're kind of just some weird set of ideas crammed into a familiar format. The difference, of course, being that Scott Walker and other people who write sort of avant-garde, you know, song-type things are inspired by artistic inspiration and reasons, whereas BuzzFeed, you know, you could argue, wholly economic inspiration. So the Ouroboros is complete, I guess. Jacob Rogers, yes, the Wikipedia list of lists is a beautiful, beautiful internet thing. Now we need, of course, to find the other list of lists and then put, is it 2 things make a list, or do you think it's 3? Like, what's the point? How many other lists of lists do we need to make a list of lists? I'm sorry. Patrick Hogan, whenever How To Basic needs any of my expertise on breaking eggs, which I mean probably pales in comparison to theirs, I'm available. I'm on board. If you have a connection, you just let me know what kind of bat signal, what kind of egg-shaped bat signal to project into the sky. MisterDrProf talks about the idea of cognitive misery, which is that, you know, human beings want to use as little cognitive power as they possibly can, and so listicles and lists are attractive because they allow us this, I think we talked about it in the episode a little bit, this kind of cognitive economy. And, you know, this makes me wonder about the list as a kind of rhetorical technique. And I haven't been paying close attention to the way the candidates in the American presidential election process have been speaking, but this makes me wonder, like, in the debates, how often a list is deployed as a rhetorical technique, as an attempt to maybe get people on board or to agree. And I would guess it must be frequently, but also weirdly invisible. So this is another sort of one of those things where it's great to sort of know what to look for so that you can shine a light on how you're being communicated with and how that might just sort of play along with your brain's pre-built biases. So yeah, this is a great comment.